Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I will be talking about The Lost World. This 1925 silent film was the very first screen adaptation of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's novel of the same name, which had actually been released only 13 years earlier. Kind of gives you an idea of just how old film really is and how close it was to the Victorian era, basically. And the movie uses the same basic premise as the book. The infamously hot-tempered scientist Professor Challenger organises an expedition to the Amazon in search of a plateau reputedly filled with supposedly extinct creatures. He's accompanied on the journey by a skeptical colleague who is mostly there to debunk his theories, a big game hunter, and a journalist. The film also adds a young woman, the daughter of a vanished colleague of Challenger's, to the exposition. Is she there solely to justify a fairly anemic romantic subplot? Yeah, pretty much. The romantic subplot almost has to be pretty anemic and desultory, though, because there's a lot going on in the expedition. Just making it to the plateau is no easy task, and once there, the group will need to survive a plethora of prehistoric beasts, a malevolent ape man, and a massive volcanic eruption. And that's before they've even tackled the job of bringing back proof of their findings. The only thing that will really suffice is to return with a live dinosaur. And as you might imagine, dragging a terrible lizard into the heart of London is the kind of plan that is likely to go dramatically wrong. So The Lost World was a critical and commercial success with universally positive, sometimes breathlessly so, contemporary reviews at the time of its release. It was also a history-making film. It was one of the first, if not the very first, motion pictures to feature stop-motion animation and to integrate that with live-action footage. It also became the first movie to be shown on an airline, on an actual flight, a risky proposition at the time given that the film stock of the era was highly flammable and planes were constructed of wood and fabric. So, this is a significant production in terms of the history of film. Plus, due to its age, it's in the public domain and easily available for you to watch for free. The question, of course, is should you and why? For me, the answer is yes, you should. It's worth taking the time to see. And the why, of course, is what I'm about to discuss. So I think to some extent there is a tendency to assume that special effects spectaculars are a relatively recent phenomenon, perhaps because of belief that, well, old movies look bad, so how could they be special effects spectaculars? But while it is true that special effects today are far more advanced and sophisticated than they were even 20 years ago, to think of special effects spectaculars as a modern phenomenon requires us to forget the disaster epics of the early 70s or that Star Wars is nearly 50 years old. Or also to ignore the scale of scenes like the burning of Atlanta in 1939's Gone with the Wind, which is over 80 years old now. I mean, it's a very problematic film in all kinds of ways, and I don't actually recommend you go and see it, but there's no doubting that that sequence was intended to thrill and terrify audiences, and was, in other words, a special effects spectacular. And make no mistake, The Lost World may be nearing its centennial, but it's absolutely a special effects spectacular. The dinosaur effects are the film's entire reason for existing and the key focus of the production. They were so revolutionary at the time that some genuinely wondered if the creatures depicted were real. In a front page article, the New York Times opined, if fakes, they were masterpieces. Modern audiences, of course, are a lot more visually jaded and will not for one second believe the creatures are real. But that doesn't in any way diminish the ingenuity and skill of the work. It may not look real to modern eyes, but I think it still looks good. Now, you may have listened to my plot summary and thought, so an expedition goes to a remote location, brings back a giant creature that defies modern science, and then it rampages through a major city. I think I've seen that film, and it was called King Kong. And in some sense, you would be right, though make no mistake, this film predates Kong by 8 years, so any narrative debt is owed by the giant ape to the giant lizard, rather than the other way around. King Kong also owes much of its own spectacular for the time visuals to the work done here. The special effects for both movies were designed and led by Willis O'Brien, a giant of the early decades of visual effects work, and the man who mentored a young fellow by the name of Ray Harryhausen. Harryhausen, of course, would go on to deliver perhaps the most famous stop-motion effects sequence of all time in the form of the Skeleton Warriors battle in Jason and the Argonauts. In other words, the pioneering work done by O'Brien on this film would not only go on to enrich one of the most famous cinematic features of all time, a movie that has been remade multiple times with theoretically more advanced techniques, yet in my opinion worse outcomes. You're not going to get a better Kong film so far than the 1933 original. But not only that, but this film also underpilled literally decades of stop motion effects that helped define multiple generations of fantastical film visuals. It is a film that casts a very long shadow. Now, one thing to note here is that there do appear to be multiple versions of this movie. Both Wikipedia and IMDb put the film's length at close to 2 hours, but the version on the Internet Archive only runs for 75 minutes. I saw the shorter version, so I'm not certain what the extra 30 minutes or so might include. That said, I suspect it's mostly more special effects sequences. Certainly the version I saw lacked none of the elements outlined in the film's Wikipedia plot summary. So either their summary is based on the shorter version, or the longer version doesn't have any major additional story elements, just more monsters. But whatever version you manage to track down, if you're at all a student of the history of film, I think this is worth a watch. Next time, we jump forward about 75 years, but we're still looking at the same story, at least in theory. It's the 1999 to 2001 TV series with the rather unwieldy title, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, which nobody at the time called it, and I won't be calling it in the next video either. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you've seen today's movie, let me know what you thought of it.